This is the landscape of Suffolk, home to Benjamin Britten. In today's programme, we'll be exploring the Serenade. From the opening notes of the haunting prologue, it's a piece that evokes the sounds of the natural world, and it also demonstrates Benjamin Britten's extraordinary affinity with the written word. This countryside is very familiar to me. Benjamin Britten was close to my family, and we used to visit him here in Suffolk. My father, Lennox Berkeley, and he were old friends, and Britten was my godfather. I feel deeply attached to his music. I used to sing it as a choir boy, and I learned so much from him, from the simplicity of his musical expression and the subject matter he chose. The Serenade is one of Britten's most sublime works, in both music and words, a treasury of English poetry drawn from Blake, Keats, and Tennyson, among others. We're going to hear a complete performance of the Serenade for tenor, horn and strings in one of Britten's favourite settings. He loved the architecture of East Anglian churches, and this one, Blythburgh, is a particularly stunning example. We've come here because this church was not only one of Britten's favourites, but is the place where 20 years after its London premiere, Britten conducted his companion Peter Pears singing at their own Aldeburgh Music Festival. Sir Colin Davis conducts the strings of the BBC Symphony Orchestra with the horn player Timothy Brown and the tenor Ian Bostridge.
Shall we just try the opening, please, of the pastoral?
The first song in the cycle describes the setting sun casting long shadows as it sinks in the west.
Will you take your best sable paintbrush? Work less hard, so it's in the distance. It's such a unity, it's beautiful when one tries to let the music speak in the same way that Britten allows this poetry to speak his music. He doesn't subject the verse to some intellectual idea that he may have. He betrays his brilliance in the orchestra, but the singing line seems to follow the way oneself would read the poem.
What's so extraordinary about the Serenade is the way in which it does engage so thoroughly with wonderful texts, and because it's full of incredibly approachable but very novel musical ideas which don't lose their appeal on repetition.
I can't remember a time when I haven't known the Serenade, because I was brought up listening to it, and it's been one of the things which drew me to the horn. Every movement, every song works They're not easy particularly, but they work perfectly, I think, for what they do, and he really hasn't got anything wrong, in my opinion.
It's Benjamin Britten's special affinity with poetry and his remarkable ability to set the English language that we're going to look at more closely now. When the young Britten burst upon the scene in the 1930s, he was soon being talked of as perhaps the greatest British composer since Purcell. So where did this most original musical voice actually come from? Edward Benjamin Britten was born in 1913 in Lowestoft. The young Ben showed a precocious talent.
I'd started writing dots and dashes on a bit of paper when I was about 5, I think. In fact, I was more interested in writing it down than even what it sounded like. But very soon, when I got my mother to try and play these curious things, I realized that one has to connect the notes with the sound.
Many of the earliest pieces were drawn directly from the young Britten's personal experience.
I mean, it must be the only 5-year-old who's ever begun a piece in 8/4, which is a rather complicated time signature, hardly ever used. But I mean, the notation, the notes are all there. They make sense in themselves, but I mean, it really doesn't add up to a piece of music. So in a sense, it's writing it because he wants to see what something looks like when he writes it down on paper. I mean, the word setting, did you know that my daddy has gone to London today? Ho, ho, ho. No, 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 it says after that.
My serious composition lesson started when I was about 12, I think it was, when I had the very good fortune to meet Frank Bridge. He used to perform most terrible operations on the music I would rather confidently show him. He would play every passage slowly on the piano and say, now listen to this, is this what you meant? And he really taught me to take as much trouble as I possibly could over every passage, every progression, every line, and I'm most grateful to him for that.
By his mid-teens, Britten was already an assured composer. He wrote everything in his head, dashing it down on paper at great speed. The Birds, written at the age of 15, sets a poem by Hilaire Belloc.